start by saying I'm not the kind of guy who does this kind of thing. I'm not some tech genius or a hacker or anything. I'm just a regular dude with a terrible habit of staying up way too late watching weird videos on YouTube. You know, the kind, animated horror stories, conspiracy theories, that sort of thing. But this time, I went too far down the rabbit hole. It all started one Friday night after work. I was sitting in my tiny apartment with a bag of McDonald's fries on the table, my phone on one hand scrolling through Reddit, and my laptop open playing some random true crime documentary on Netflix. Just another lazy night. Then I stumbled across this post on a forum I didn't even remember subscribing to. The title was simple: Escape Room Experience for Real Adventurers Only. Now, I'm not huge on escape rooms, but I've done a couple with friends, and they're fun when you're trying to solve clues with a group. But this one? It promised something different. The description was vague, but intriguing. Looking for a thrill? Try the most realistic escape room ever. Immersive. Unforgettable. Only $150. $150 felt steep, but the ad claimed it was a one-of-a-kind experience, and I was feeling impulsive. Plus, it had a PayPal link, which made it seem legit. The part that sold me, though, was this line: "Everything will feel real, but don't worry, it's all a game. Trust us." In hindsight, the "trust us" should have been a red flag. But like I said, it was a boring Friday night. I clicked the link, paid the $150, and within a minute, I got an email confirmation. "Your session is booked. Instructions will follow shortly. Don't share this with anyone." No company name, no phone number, just a generic Gmail address. That should have been my second red flag, but instead of thinking critically, I felt a rush of excitement. I told myself it was probably a pop-up escape room run by some quirky startup. Maybe I'd even vlog it for my TikTok followers. Then about 10 minutes later, I got another email. This one had a file attachment called pre-game-rules.pdf. I downloaded it without a second thought. Big mistake. The PDF was plain, no branding or anything, just a bulleted list of rules. Arrive at the location alone, no exceptions, no phones, cameras, or recording devices. This is to preserve the experience. You'll be blindfolded upon arrival, again, to make the experience more immersive. Follow all instructions carefully. Failing to do so could result in serious injury or termination of the game. Do not attempt to escape until instructed. The bottom of the document had a location, an industrial-looking address on the outskirts of town, way beyond the main city. Not a place I'd normally go, but I figured it added to the mystery. The day of the session came fast, and I almost chickened out. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. I left my phone at home, threw on a hoodie, and hopped into an Uber to the address. When we pulled up, I swear the driver gave me a weird look, like he was wondering why anyone would willingly go to this place. The building was an old warehouse with boarded-up windows and faded graffiti all over the walls. The only sign of life was a single black door with a faint red light glowing above it. I stepped out of the car, my heart racing. There was no sign of anyone around, no cars, no people. For a second, I wondered if I was being pranked, but then I saw a small note taped to the door. "Welcome to the experience. Knock 3 times. I hesitated, but eventually I knocked. 3 sharp raps. The door creaked open almost immediately. No one was there, but a voice echoed from somewhere inside. "Step in and close the door behind you." The first thing I noticed was the smell, damp and metallic, like rusted pipes and wet concrete. The second thing I noticed was the table just inside the door. On it was a black blindfold and a laminated card. The card read, "Put on the blindfold. Someone will guide you to the starting point. No talking." This was the part where my instinct screamed at me to leave. Everything about this screamed sketchy. but I'd come all this way, and I'd already paid. Plus, I told myself it was all just part of the experience. I tied the blindfold over my eyes, plunging myself into darkness. My hands felt clammy, and my heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whoever was guiding me would hear it. After what felt like an eternity, I heard soft footsteps approaching. A gloved hand grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firm enough to make me freeze. The person said nothing, just pulled me forward. I could hear the faint echo of our steps as we moved deeper into the building. At one point I felt a change in the air, cooler, almost like we'd entered a basement or something underground. My gut twisted. Then, without warning, the hand let go. "Wait here," the voice said. It was the same one I'd heard earlier, deep and monotone, the kind of voice that doesn't give you any clues about the person behind it. I waited, blindfolded and alone, for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes. Then I heard a metallic clang, a door opening, and the voice again. "Your game begins now." Good luck. When I pulled off the blindfold, I almost didn't recognize where I was. It was a small room, dimly lit by a single flickering fluorescent light overhead. The walls were bare concrete, and the only piece of furniture was a rusty metal table in the center. On the table was a box, a simple wooden box with a lock on it. Next to it was a piece of paper, handwritten in shaky letters. "The key is closer than you think. Tick-tock." A chill ran down my spine. I was expecting something cheesy, like an actor popping out to scare me, but this felt off. It was too quiet, too real. I looked around the room for anything that might be the key, but there wasn't much to see. That's when I noticed something weird about the walls. One of them had small holes in it, like the kind you'd see in a locker. When I leaned closer, I could feel cool air coming through the holes, and faintly I could hear something ticking. The ticking was faint but steady, like the sound of an old pocket watch. I pressed my ear closer to the holes in the wall, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That's when I saw it, something metallic glinting just inside one of the holes. It was small, maybe the size of a dime, and barely visible in the dim light. I crouched down to get a better look and realized it was a tiny key dangling on a thin wire. "Closer than you think," I muttered to myself, remembering the note. The wire holding the key led back into the wall, disappearing into darkness. I hesitated. It felt too easy, but before I could talk myself out of it, I stuck my hand into the hole. At first, it seemed fine. My fingers brushed against the key, but just as I started to grab it, I heard a sharp click. Pain shot through my wrist. I screamed and yanked my hand back, but it was stuck, caught in something cold and unyielding. My heart was hammering in my chest as I fumbled to see what had grabbed me. It was a bear trap, a freaking bear trap, bolted to the inside of the wall. The teeth weren't sharp enough to break the skin, but they clamped down hard enough to feel like my bones were about to snap. I tried prying it open with my free hand, but it wouldn't budge. The more I struggled, the tighter it seemed to get. That's when I heard the voice again, this time from a hidden speaker in the ceiling. "You'll have to earn your freedom," it said, calm and emotionless. "There's always a cost." I was too panicked to think straight, but then I noticed something. A second wire running parallel to the first one. This one wasn't holding the key. It was connected to a small lever sticking out from the wall, just above the hole. The meaning was clear: pull the lever or stay trapped. I didn't know what would happen if I pulled it, but I was desperate to get my hand free. My fingers were going numb, and every second in that trap felt like an eternity. I took a deep breath and reached for the lever. The second I touched it, the ticking sound stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard a soft hiss, like air escaping a balloon. My stomach dropped. I looked around wildly, trying to figure out what had changed, when I saw the vents in the ceiling. A pale, greenish mist was seeping out of them. Gas. I started coughing almost immediately. My eyes burned, and my throat felt like it was on fire. I pulled the lever without thinking, and the bear trap released my wrist with a brutal snap. I stumbled back, clutching my arm, and fell to the ground, gasping for air. The gas was filling the room fast. My head was spinning, and I could barely see through the haze, but I knew I had to act fast. I crawled back to the hole in the wall, my lungs screaming for air. The key was still dangling there, untouched. This time I grabbed it without hesitation. It was smaller than I expected, cold and slightly tarnished, like it had been sitting there for years. I held it tightly and staggered to the table. The wooden box was the only thing left. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the key, but I managed to shove it into the lock and twist. The box popped open with a soft click. Inside was a syringe. It looked like something out of a hospital, clean, sterile, with a clear liquid inside. There was a note taped to it, scrawled in the same shaky handwriting as before. For the next door. Use it, or stay here forever. The gas was thicker now, swirling around my legs like fog. My vision was starting to blur, and I could barely stay on my feet. I didn't know what the syringe would do. It could be poison, or it could be some twisted antidote. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized I didn't have a choice. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and rolled up my sleeve. My hand was still throbbing from the bear trap, and I could feel bruises forming around my wrist. "Here goes nothing," I muttered, and jabbed the needle into my arm. The liquid burned as it entered my bloodstream, and for a second, I thought I'd made a huge mistake. My vision went completely black, and I felt a strange, icy sensation spreading through my chest. Then, just as quickly as it started, the pain stopped. When I opened my eyes, the gas was gone. So was the wooden box. The room looked different now, brighter somehow, and the table was covered in scratches and stains I hadn't noticed before. On the far wall, where there had been nothing but concrete, there was now a heavy steel door with a glowing keypad next to it. I stood up, my legs shaky but functional, and stumbled over to the door. The keypad had a single message flashing on its screen. Enter the code. 60 seconds. That's when I noticed the countdown starting. 60, 59, 58. I panicked. There was no code, no hint, no clue. My mind raced as the numbers ticked down, and I felt like I was about to lose it when I remembered something, the ticking sound from earlier. I sprinted back to the wall with the holes where the bear trap had grabbed me. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It wasn't random. It was Morse code. My heart was pounding as I tried to translate it in my head. Long, short, short, 3. Long, long, short, 7. I ran back to the keypad and punched in the numbers with trembling hands. 37. The countdown stopped at 3. The door creaked open. What was on the other side made my stomach drop. The steel door swung open with an eerie groan, revealing a long, dimly lit hallway. The walls were painted a deep, rusty red like dried blood, and the air smelled faintly of bleach and iron. I wanted to believe it was just a choice of paint, but the metallic tang in the air told me otherwise. There was no turning back now. My wrist throbbed, my chest still felt tight from the gas, and my arm burned where the syringe had pierced it. But I kept moving forward. What choice did I have? The hallways seemed to stretch on forever, the overhead fluorescent lights flickering every few steps. Each buzz of the lights felt like the growl of some unseen predator. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I was completely alone. Or at least, I thought I was. About halfway down the hall, I noticed something strange. My shadow wasn't moving like it should. At first, I thought it was just the flickering lights playing tricks on my eyes. But as I kept walking, I realized the shadow was a step out of sync. When I stopped, it kept moving. When I turned, it didn't follow. I froze, staring at it, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when the shadow turned to face me. I swear to God it shifted. It had no features, no face, but I could feel it looking at me. My throat tightened, and I instinctively took a step back. The shadow didn't move this time, it just stood there, elongated and unnatural, as if daring me to do something. Then it raised a hand. A sharp, metallic clang echoed down the hall, snapping me out of my trance. I turned toward the noise and saw a heavy steel door slamming shut at the far end of the corridor. "Come on," I muttered, forcing myself to look away from the shadow. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the door. I didn't look back, but I could feel the shadow watching me the whole way. When I reached the door, I realized it wasn't locked. No keypad, no puzzle, just a simple, heavy handle. That alone was suspicious. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The room was bigger than I expected, with rows of shelves running from floor to ceiling like a storage facility. But instead of boxes or supplies, the shelves were filled with mannequins, hundreds of them. They were all different. Some were dressed in tattered clothes, others were completely naked. Their faces were featureless, smooth and blank, but the longer I stared, the more I felt like they were looking back at me. I weaved my way through the shelves, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was cold, and my breath came out in short, visible puffs. Every so often I swore I heard a faint rustling behind me, but when I turned around, nothing had moved. At least, that's what I told myself. About halfway through the room, I found a small table with a piece of paper taped to it. The handwriting was the same as before, shaky and uneven. "One of them is the key. Find it before they find you." I stared at the note, my stomach sinking. The mannequins weren't just props, they were part of the game. I looked around, my pulse quickening. There were too many of them. How was I supposed to find a key in this mess? And what did it mean by "before they find you"? My eyes landed on the nearest mannequin. It was dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned suit, its arms slightly outstretched, as if reaching for something. I hesitated, then stepped closer. My hands trembled as I reached for its chest, feeling for a hidden compartment or pocket. Nothing. I moved to the next one, then the next. Still nothing. That's when I heard it. A soft click-clack behind me, like plastic tapping against the concrete floor. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly I turned around. One of the mannequins was no longer on its shelf. It stood in the middle of the aisle, its head tilted slightly to the side, as if studying me. "No," I whispered, backing away. The mannequin didn't move, but as I turned to walk away, I heard the sound again. Click-clack, click-clack. I spun around, and now there were two of them in the aisle. They weren't walking, at least not when I was looking, but they were definitely closer. Panic set in. I turned and ran, weaving through the shelves, trying to put as much distance between me and them as possible, but the sound followed me, growing louder and faster. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. I didn't stop running until I reached the far end of the room, where another steel door waited. This one had a keypad, its screen flashing red. I needed a key, just like before. Frantic, I spun around. The mannequins were closing in, their faceless heads all tilted in my direction. One of them stood out. It was smaller than the others, like a child mannequin dressed in a bright red hoodie. I don't know how I knew, but I did. That was the one. I bolted toward it, shoving past the others. My fingers fumbled as I grabbed its hoodie and reached inside. Something cold and metal grazed my hand. The key. The mannequins were closing in now, their limbs jerking unnaturally as they moved. One of them reached for me, its smooth hand brushing my arm. I yanked the key free and sprinted to the door. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I managed to shove it into the lock and twist. The door clicked open and I stumbled through, slamming it shut behind me. For a moment there was silence. I leaned against the door, gasping for air. My wrist throbbed and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally looked up, I realized I wasn't safe. The room I'd entered was pitch black, except for a single spotlight shining on the floor. In the center of the light was a trail of dark red footprints leading deeper into the darkness. A soft voice crackled through the speaker system. "Congratulations," it said. "You've made it this far, but the real game is just beginning." My stomach turned as the spotlight flickered. And then the lights went out completely. When the lights went out, the room was silent. Too silent. No hum from the overhead fluorescents, no mechanical whirring, just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. I stayed frozen against the door, trying to steady my breathing, but it was impossible to ignore the pitch-black darkness surrounding me. It wasn't just the absence of light. It felt like the kind of dark that swallowed everything. Then I heard the first sound, a faint drip, drip, drip. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like water hitting metal, and it seemed to echo from somewhere deep in the room. But there was no water, only the blood trail still visible beneath me thanks to the faint glow of the door's keypad. I didn't want to follow it, but what choice did I have? I crouched down, running my fingers along the floor to keep track of the blood trail. It was sticky, still wet, and the metallic smell made my stomach churn. The trail led forward, winding left, then right, splitting into smaller paths at several points. It didn't take long to realize where I was. A maze. The walls were uneven and rough, made of cold stone that felt damp to the touch. Every so often I'd brush against something sharp, like jagged metal jutting out from the walls. The farther I went, the worse the smell got, sour and putrid, like rotting meat. I tried not to think about what might be causing it. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed through the maze. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far enough for comfort either. I froze, my fingers clutching the wall. My mind raced, trying to picture what could be making that sound. A recording? Some kind of animatronic? Or was it something real? The growl came again, louder this time. It seemed to reverberate through the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. I picked up the pace, moving faster now, even though every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. The blood trail twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the maze. The sound of my own footsteps felt deafening against the stillness. Then I hit the first dead end. The blood trail stopped abruptly at a stone wall, where something had been crudely carved into the surface. I leaned closer, squinting in the faint glow of the keypad light behind me. It was a message scratched into the stone with something sharp. "They can't see you if you don't move." Before I could process what that meant, I heard the growl again, this time right behind me. I turned slowly, my whole body shaking. In the faint glow, I could just barely make out a shape at the end of the corridor. It was huge, crouched low to the ground, its limbs too long and thin to belong to anything human. Its skin, or whatever covered it, was pale and slick, almost reflective in the faint light. Its head tilted, and I heard a deep, rattling inhale like it was sniffing the air. I froze, remembering the message on the wall. "They can't see you if you don't move." It felt impossible, but I forced myself to stay perfectly still. My muscles burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't even blink. The creature moved closer, its long claws clicking against the stone floor. Its head swiveled toward me, and I could see its face now, or rather, its lack of one. Where its eyes should have been were two gaping holes, and its mouth was a jagged slit that stretched far too wide. It sniffed again, its head jerking erratically. I thought I was going to pass out from sheer terror, but just as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and skittered away down another corridor, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't move for a full minute after it was gone. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might collapse, but I forced myself to follow the blood trail again. The deeper I went, the more the maze seemed to change. The walls grew narrower, the air thicker, and the blood trail started to dry, making it harder to follow. Then, somewhere up ahead, I heard a faint, beeping sound. It was slow at first, like the ticking of a clock, but it started to speed up as I got closer. My heart sank when I realized what it was. A countdown. I rounded a corner and found a large metal box bolted to the wall. A digital timer on its surface glowed red. 3:42, 3:41, 3:40. Beneath the timer was another note: solve the puzzle or die. The box had 3 dials, each with numbers ranging from 1 to 9. Above the dials was a small screen displaying this riddle. The sum of 3 is 9, but 1 hides in plain sight. The middle leads the way. I stared at it, my brain scrambling to make sense of the words. The timer was ticking down fast, and the beeping was getting louder, echoing through the maze. The sum of 3 is 9, I muttered to myself. 3 numbers that add up to 9. But 1 hides in plain sight. I tried a few random combinations, but nothing worked. Each incorrect attempt made the timer beep faster, as if taunting me. Then it clicked. The 1 hides in plain sight must mean one of the numbers was 1, and the middle leads the way meant the second number was the largest. I twisted the dials to 1, 7, and 1. The timer froze at 007, and the box popped open with a hiss. Inside was another key, but this one was different. Black and engraved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. I grabbed it and turned, ready to find the next door. That's when I heard the growl again. This time, it wasn't just one creature. The sound echoed from all around me, too many growls to count. I bolted, clutching the key like my life depended on it. The maze was a blur of twisting corridors and dead ends, and every turn seemed to bring the growls closer. I rounded a corner and saw it, a steel door at the end of the hallway with a glowing lock that matched the black key. Behind me, the growls turned into full-blown shrieks, inhuman and deafening. I reached the door, slammed the key into the lock, and twisted. The door swung open just as I felt something cold and wet brush against my back. I dove through, pulling the door shut behind me. The shrieks stopped. I turned to see where I was now. It was a spiral staircase descending into pitch-black darkness. At the top of the stairs was another note, written in the same shaky handwriting. Almost there. Just one more level to go. I didn't feel relief. I felt dread. The spiral staircase seemed endless. Each step groaned under my weight, and the deeper I went, the colder the air grew. The walls around me dripped with moisture, and the smell of decay was almost unbearable. My legs felt like lead, but I kept descending, clutching the rail with one hand and the black key in the other. Every so often, I'd hear faint whispers coming from the darkness below. Soft, indistinct voices that seemed to be saying my name. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in a cavernous room. The ceiling arched high above me, disappearing into shadows, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging from a frayed cord in the center of the space. Under the light was a table. I approached it cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the vast silence. The table was old and battered, its surface covered in deep gouges and stains that I didn't want to think about. On it was a single object, a VHS tape. The label was handwritten in black marker, "Play Me." I looked around the room, searching for a trap, but it was empty. No doors, no windows, just the table and the light. At the far end of the room, a small CRT television sat on a rickety stand, its screen flickering with static. I didn't want to touch the tape, but there was no other option. With shaky hands, I picked it up and carried it to the TV. The VCR was already humming faintly, as if it had been waiting for me. I slid the tape inside and pressed play. At first, the screen was nothing but static, accompanied by a low, droning hum. Then the image shifted and I saw a room that looked disturbingly familiar, the same cavern I was standing in. In the center of the frame was the table, but this time someone was sitting at it. It was me. I stared, frozen, as the figure on the screen mirrored my every movement. When I raised my hand, so did the version of me in the video. But then something changed. The version of me on the screen suddenly looked up, its eyes wide with terror. It mouthed something silently, pointing toward the corner of the room. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, following the direction of its finger. At first, I didn't see anything. The corner was cloaked in shadows, the light from the bulb barely reaching it. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was something there, a figure hunched and still. It was massive, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its limbs were long and gnarled, and its skin was mottled and slick, like it was rotting from the inside out. Then it moved. The creature unfolded itself slowly, its joints cracking like splintering wood. It didn't charge or lunge, it just stood there, watching me with empty black sockets where its eyes should have been. The sound of static grew louder, almost deafening, and when I turned back to the screen, the version of me was gone. The camera now focused on the creature, which was no longer in the corner of the room. It was directly behind me. I didn't look back. My instincts screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The TV flickered, and a new message appeared on the screen. "Use the key!" My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it, but I gripped the black key and searched the room for a lock. That's when I noticed it. An iron door embedded in the floor just a few feet from the table. It hadn't been there before. I scrambled toward it, the creature's low growl vibrating through the air. As I reached the door, I felt the ground tremble beneath me, and the growl turned into a deafening roar. The lock was rusted and stiff, but I jammed the key in and twisted. The door swung open, revealing a narrow tunnel plunging into darkness. Without thinking, I threw myself in and slammed it shut behind me. The tunnel was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for me to crawl. The walls were rough and jagged, scraping against my skin as I moved. Behind me, I heard the creature pounding against the iron door, its roars echoing through the narrow passage. I didn't know how long the door would hold, so I kept crawling, my hands and knees bleeding from the jagged floor. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but finally I saw a faint light up ahead. My heart leapt as I scrambled toward it, desperate for an exit. When I reached the end, I found myself staring at a ladder leading up to a hatch. The light was coming from the cracks around its edges. I climbed, my body screaming in protest, and shoved the hatch open. I emerged into blinding sunlight, gasping for air. I was in the middle of an open field, surrounded by nothing but grass and trees. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the maze. Behind me, the hatch slammed shut and disappeared, leaving no trace of the tunnel. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process everything that had happened. My clothes were torn, my body covered in bruises and cuts, but I was alive. Then I heard the sound of a car engine. A black van was parked at the edge of the field, its engine idling. As I approached, the driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in a suit and dark sunglasses. "Congratulations," he said, his voice calm and detached. You've completed the experience. I stared at him, speechless. What the hell was that? I finally managed to choke out. The man smiled faintly. An immersive escape room, just as promised. We hope you enjoyed it. Enjoyed it? I shouted. I almost died in there. The man's smile didn't falter. The waiver you signed made it clear that all risks were part of the experience. You agreed to the terms. Before I could respond, he tossed a small envelope out the window. Your prize! Have a nice day. The van drove off, leaving me standing there, stunned. Inside the envelope was a single slip of paper with a message scrawled in the same shaky handwriting. Congratulations on surviving. You've proven yourself. Welcome to Level 2. Beneath the note was another key. This one was gold. I'm back home now, but I haven't slept. Every time I close my eyes, I see the creature in the corner, or the mannequins, or the blood-stained maze. And the key is sitting on my desk, gleaming in the dim light. I don't know what Level 2 means, but I have a feeling I'm about to find out. The gold key sat on my desk for 3 days. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Every time I glanced at it, my stomach churned, and my mind replayed the horrors I'd endured in that escape room. I should have thrown it out or burned it, but deep down I knew that wouldn't change anything. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. On the 4th night, I woke to the sound of a knock at my door. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. I froze in bed, my heart pounding. No one knocks at 3 a.m. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole, but no one was there. Just an empty hallway bathed in flickering fluorescent light. Then I heard it again. 3 knocks, but this time they came from inside my apartment. I spun around, my eyes scanning the darkened living room. The gold key was gone from the desk. A faint light caught my attention. It was coming from my kitchen, where the refrigerator door hung open, spilling a dim glow across the floor. As I approached, I saw something that shouldn't have been there, an elevator. It was wedged awkwardly into the wall where my fridge had been, the metal doors glinting under the light. Above them, a small digital display read, Level 2. I wanted to run, but my feet moved on their own. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a small, dimly lit interior with no buttons or controls, just a single keyhole in the panel. The gold key was already in my hand. I don't even remember reaching for it, but suddenly I was inside the elevator, the key twisting in the lock. The doors closed and the elevator began to descend, faster and faster, until my stomach felt like it was in my throat. When it finally stopped, the doors slid open to reveal complete darkness. A voice crackled over an unseen speaker. Welcome to Level 2. Survive. The lights blinked on and I stepped into what looked like an abandoned shopping mall. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of mildew and something faintly metallic. The escalators were frozen in mid-motion, their steps coated in dust, and the once bright storefronts were now gaping black holes. I took a cautious step forward, my shoes crunching on shattered glass. That's when I saw the first body. It was slumped against a kiosk, its face hidden behind a black hood. A note was pinned to its chest, the same shaky handwriting I'd seen before. They're hunting you now. A sound behind me made my blood run cold, a soft scraping, like metal dragging across concrete. I spun around, but nothing was there. I ran. The mall seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth of empty storefronts and shadowy corridors. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, plunging whole sections into darkness. I tried to stay in the light, but the scraping sound followed me, growing louder and more frantic. I rounded a corner and came face to face with one of them. It was humanoid, but wrong, its skin pale and stretched taut over its frame, its fingers ending in long, rusted blades, its head twitched unnaturally as it cocked to one side, sniffing the air. The note hadn't lied. It was hunting me. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. The creature's eyeless face snapped toward me, and it let out a guttural shriek. I ran again, this time with no plan, no sense of direction. I could hear more of them now, their claws scraping against the floor as they closed in from all sides. Every corner I turned seemed to lead to another dead end or a collapsed section of the mall. Then I saw it. A security office at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the hallway. I bolted for it, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it just as one of the creatures lunged for me. Its claws scraped against the glass window, leaving deep gouges as it snarled and thrashed. Inside the office, monitors lined the walls, each one displaying a different part of the mall. The screens flickered with static, but I could make out shapes moving in the darkness, dozens of them, maybe more. On the desk was another note, along with a small red button covered by a plastic case. "End the level. Push the button." The creatures were pounding on the door now, the glass beginning to crack under the force. My hand hovered over the button. That's when I saw it, a figure on one of the monitors standing in the middle of the mall. It wasn't one of the creatures, it was a person dressed in the same black hoodie as the body I'd found earlier. They looked directly at the camera and shook their head as if to say, "Don't." I hesitated, torn between the button and the figure on the screen. The glass shattered, and one of the creatures forced its way into the room, its claws swiping inches from my face. I slammed the button. The lights in the mall flickered violently, then shut off completely. For a moment, there was only silence. Then I felt the floor give way beneath me, and I was falling, free falling into darkness, the air rushing past me as my screams echoed endlessly. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. The gold key was gone, but a new envelope sat on my desk. Inside was another note. "You survived level 2. The game continues." I burned the note. I packed a bag and left town that night. But it doesn't matter. Wherever I go, I can feel it following me. I see shadows move where they shouldn't, hear faint whispers in the dead of night. The game isn't over. It never will be. At least not in my head.